So how was work? Well, Alice asked George as the boys left Mr. Fussman's pet shop together on Saturday afternoon. George worked at the pet shop every Saturday. Mr. Firstman was probably the only store owner left in Beaver Brook who was happy to see George when he walked into his shop. Except George's mom, of course. Sure, the magical superbird had shown up at the pet shop once or twice, but Mr. Firstman had never gotten angry with all the trouble the bird caused. He actually thought George was funny. Some old stuff stopped the fight between two hamsters, fed crickets to the lizards, cleaned the poop out of the parakeet cage. George smiled at Alice's grossed out expression. It's a tough job, but somebody has to do it. And besides, now I have enough money to get chocolate covered raisins with my popcorn. Excellent, Alice said. I read the schedule this morning. The first scary movie is a really old one called Tentacles of Terror. I love that movie, George said. There's this giant octopus that comes out of Lake Michigan and squirts black gunk all over Chicago. I've seen it before too, Alice said. The octopus has got 8 really strong green arms. He yanks a giant skyscraper out of the ground with just one tentacle. George laughed. Yeah, I remember seeing it on TV one night when I was having a sleepover at... George stopped himself. I mean, at you-know-who's house. Yeah, you-know-who is lucky to have a TV in his room, Alex said. Sleepovers were always great at his house. George frowned. It'll be better to see those giant tentacles on a big movie screen anyway, he said, forcing a smile. Definitely, Alice agreed. Everybody loves scary movies, George said, and we better hurry if we want to get good seats. I bet half the school is going to be there. Where is everybody? George asked Alice a few minutes later as they stood in the lobby of the movie theater. The place was almost empty except for a couple of teenagers who were buying a popcorn. There's no one here from my grade, that's for sure, Alice said. You think everyone went to the party for you-know-who? George wandered around. It could be, Alice said, but they could have gone for one of the other artists and not for you-know-who. I thought at least Louis would be here, George said, looking around the lobby. Then he stopped himself. I can't believe I just said that. Yeah, things are really bad when you're actually looking for Louis to show up, Alice added sadly. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing today. We're here and we're going to have a great time, George insisted. Exactly, Alice agreed. You want to get some popcorn? George asked Alice. Good idea, Alice told him. The boys got in line behind a group of teenage guys. I'm going to buy the super ginormous bag of popcorn, Alice said. It's got to last through 5 super scary movies, or I could get a box of gummy worms and a small popcorn, or... George didn't hear the rest of what Alice said. He wasn't paying attention. He couldn't. Because at that very moment, there was something super scary going on. And it wasn't inside the movie theater. It was inside George. Blink blonk, slink slonk. There were bubbles in his belly, hundreds of them. George was starring in his own movie, The Battle of the Burb, and it was a battle. George was losing. Jing jang, cling clang. The bubbles were wiggling around his waist and ricocheting from his rib cage. George wanted to ask Alex for help, but he didn't dare open his mouth. The bird might slip out if he did. George had no idea what the bird would do if it burst out right here in the middle of the movie theater. All he knew was it would be bad. George tried to get Alex's attention. He rubbed his head and patted his belly at the same time. That was the secret signal Alex had come up with to let him know there was a bird coming. But Alex wasn't looking at George. He was too busy studying the candy boxes behind the counter. Some of the teenagers in line were looking at George though, and they were laughing. Neat trick, kid, one of them said. It's harder than it looks, other teen said as he tried patting his head and rubbing his belly. George couldn't believe it. Alex was the only one in the whole line who didn't see what he was doing. Flonk flick, glonkling, now the bubbles were parachuting from his palate and licking at his burp. Uh-oh. Nice burp, kid, one of the teenagers said. But George knew there was nothing nice about this burp. It was already making George do some really rotten stuff, like climb right over the candy case in the middle of the lobby of the movie theater. Get down from there, the person behind the counter shouted at him. Customers aren't allowed back here. But the burp wasn't the customer. It was a burp, and burps go wherever they please. Dude, no! Alex tried to grab George's shirt and pull him back over to the customer side of the counter. But Alex was no match for the super burp. George's hands grabbed a box of red hot cinnamon candies from behind the counter. They ripped open the box, tossing the candies in the air. George opened his mouth wide and started to catch the candies as they fell. Plop, plop, plop. The teenagers all started cheering. Go, kid! Go, kid! Go, kid! George caught some more red hot candies in his mouth. Plop, plop, plop. Oh, George shouted. Those candies were really, really hot. The next thing George knew, he was racing over to the soda fountain. He stuck his head under the orange soda faucet and opened his lips. Then he pulled on the lever. Orange soda gushed into his mouth. Ah! The manager of the theater rushed out of his office shouting, What do you think you are doing? He started racing toward the candy counter. Catch the kid, the manager yelled to the girl selling candy. The candy seller started to chase George. She was pretty fast, but the bird was faster. It made George run away from the candy seller. The manager circled around the other side of the counter. He blocked George from leaving. George turned and tried to run the other way, but the candy seller blocked his path. George was trapped. Burps don't like to be trapped, so the burp made George do the only thing it could. Kawabunga! George shouted as he dove headfirst into the giant popcorn machine. Pop, pop, pop. Kernels of yellow corn popped all around George's head. Pop, 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 pop. That last pop wasn't a kernel of corn. It was something bursting inside George's belly. It felt like someone had stuck a pin in a balloon down there. All the air rushed out of him. The magical super bird was gone, but George was still there with his head in the popcorn machine and his feet sticking up in the air. George wasn't going to be seeing any movies today, that was for sure. The stupid super bird had ruined things for him again.